Now we made our way all the way down to the small intestine, and the small intestine extends from the pyloric sphincter of the stomach all the way down until it reaches the large intestine. It fills up most of the abdominal cavity. It is a tubular organ. This is where most of digestion is going to happen, and the vast majority of absorption occurs there. Everything that is pretty much unable to be digested or absorbed will move on to the large intestine. The small intestine receives chyme from the stomach, and it also receives the secretions from the liver and from the pancreas. There are 3 different parts of the small intestine, and you want to know them in order. So the first one is the duodenum, followed by the jejunum, followed by the ileum. And to remember them, you could use the mnemonic DJI. Duodenum is that C-shaped part, and it is found, it is the shortest part. This is where the pancreas is wedging itself in that C-shape duodenum. The jejunum is the middle portion. It is thicker, and it is the most active of all 3, meaning that the motility, there's a lot of motion that is happening there. And then the ileum, also known as the distal ileum, that's the most distal part. This is the part that will connect to the large intestine, and it contains lots of Peyer's patches, and those are lots of lymphatic tissue or lymph nodules that again are going to try to pick up any form of pathogens that might be entering the body through our food or drinks. Remember, the abdominal cavity is surrounded by the peritoneal cavity, which is one of the serous membranes. There is a double fold of the peritoneum that is known as the greater omentum. The greater omentum covers the whole small and large intestine. It kind of covers it kind of like a drape. And the jejunum and the ileum, both of them are suspended by another double layer of peritoneum known as the mesentery. The mesentery will take the blood supply and the lymphatics and the nerves to the intestinal wall. So we'll see what these look like. This right here is what we did, is that we removed the skin and the abdominal muscles, and the first thing you will find is this, what kind of looks like a curtain or a tablecloth, and that is the greater omentum. This is a layer of the peritoneum that extends from the greater curvature of the stomach, so that right here is your stomach, from the greater curvature of the stomach all the way down, and it keeps the small intestinal loops and the large intestine, it keeps them inside of the abdominal cavity. In order to find the intestinal loops, we'd have to remove and cut away that greater omentum, and that's what we've done here. Here you can see now the 3 parts of the small intestine. So there's your C-shaped duodenum, followed by the jejunum, and then followed by the terminal ileum. The ileum enters into the large intestine. There is a valve there that is known as the ileocecal valve, the valve between the ileum and the cecum. So the ileocecal valve that controls the passage of chyme from the small to the large intestine. Here you can see that mesentery, which is another fold of the peritoneum that again brings the blood supply, lymphatics, and nerves to the intestinal loop. And that is so that there is no tangling with all of this. So you can imagine having all of these loose intestinal loops with lots of loops or lots of branches of arteries and veins and nerves. That would have been a huge mess. So that double fold of peritoneum brings in the blood supply and the lymphatics and the nerves to the intestinal loops. Now, the structure of the small intestinal wall, that is something that we've already discussed before, but it's really important, and I would like to go over it again because it helps us understand the final steps of digestion and how absorption occurs. So I'm going to go straight to the image, and hopefully this looks familiar, where we are looking to the inside of the lumen of the small intestine. You could see these folds. Those are known as the plica circularis, which are basically folds of the mucosa. And in order, again, to increase the surface area, increase the contact between the mucosa and the chyme as it passes. if we take one of these, the plica circularis has all of these villi on top. This is what the villus looks like. Okay, so you'll see that the villus has a core of connective tissue with blood vessels and the lymphatic capillary in the middle, and lined by tons of simple columnar epithelium. And in the middle, like kind of dispersed in there, are some mucus glands or goblet cells to produce mucus. So there's that picture right there. And then if you take an individual simple columnar epithelial cell, you could see what it looks like here, where we have these microvilli. In the membranes, in the cell membranes of these microvilli, that's where the enzymes that are responsible for the final steps of digestion are found. So really, digestion doesn't really finalize until it reaches these microvilli. Now, what are the secretions of the small intestine? Well, the small intestine doesn't really secrete digestive enzymes. Remember, the final enzymes are found within the cell membrane of the microvilli, so they're not secreted into the lumen. But what the small intestine does secrete is some mucus in order to kind of lubricate and help with the movement of chyme. And it also has special kinds of glands known as Brunner's glands, and those secrete a very thick alkalinic mucus. Okay, and it happens in response to contact with chyme. That should be a Y, not an I, and mechanical stimulation. So when the small intestine, the wall is extended, again, it stimulates stretch receptors. The passage of that chyme, especially if it's still acidic due to the hydrochloric acid from the stomach, that it'll stimulate these Brunner's gland to make a very thick alkalinic mucus. Intestinal glands can also secrete a watery fluid in order to dilute chyme and help the digestive enzymes perform their function, and also helps the chyme kind of pass through the loop where the chyme is not too thick. So what are the enzymes that are found in the membranes of these microvilli? So remember again, these enzymes are found in the cell membranes here. And they are peptidases. These are going to finalize the digestion of protein into amino acids. Sucrase, maltase, and lactase. These are going to digest these disaccharides, sucrose, maltose, and lactose, into their monosaccharide units, into their monomers, which are glucose, fructose, and galactose. And those are the sugars that the monosaccharides that our body can absorb. Lipase enzyme, again, will finalize the digestion of fat into fatty acids and glycerol. So absorption in the small intestine, that is really the main, where most of the absorption happens. So the small intestine is the most important absorbing organ of the alimentary canal. It is so effective that by the time the chyme reaches the large intestine, there really isn't much left to be absorbed. So we need to walk through the digestion and absorption of everything that we eat. So first off, carbohydrates. Remember we said that carbs, we start off carbohydrate digestion through salivary amylase in the oral cavity, and then pancreatic amylase in the intestine that is going to break down starch and glycogen into disaccharides. Okay, these disaccharides will eventually break down into monosaccharides in the microvilli because, thanks to the action of sucrase, maltase, and lactase. Monosaccharides are eventually what we can absorb, and those are absorbed by either facilitated diffusion or active transport, and these are absorbed directly into the blood vessels that are found in the villi. So let's take a look at what the villus look like. So your monosaccharides will be absorbed straight into the capillaries of the villus. Something that I would like to point to in carbohydrate metabolism is the lack of the enzyme lactase. Okay, so in lactose intolerance, what the problem is these patients do not have or have a deficiency of the lactase enzyme. So there is the inability to break down milk sugar into its monomer, into its monosaccharides. That means that sugar, lactose, is going to accumulate within the small intestine. It is a sugar, so it will ferment, leading to the production of gas that can lead to abdominal distension, flatulence, which is the passage of gas. It can lead to vomiting and diarrhea, again, because of that fermentation that occurred. Now for protein digestion, nothing happens to protein in the oral cavity, but protein digestion does start in the stomach thanks to the action of pepsinogen. So remember, pepsinogen released by the stomach is activated into pepsin by the action of hydrochloric acid. And then, so that will help in breaking down proteins into polypeptides. We also have the pancreatic protein digesting enzymes, collectively known as proteases. If you remember, those were trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. Those will break down your proteins into smaller peptides. And then the intestinal peptidases will break down the peptides into amino acids. So that final stage again that happens in the microvilli of the intestinal cells. Now, these amino acids are going to be absorbed through active transport. So again, amino with an A, active transport with an A, into the blood vessels. And remember that, these monosaccharides and amino acids will eventually go through the portal circulation, would have to go to the liver. Fat digestion is there's a little bit more involved when it comes into fat. Okay, first off, we have to emulsify it through these bile salts. So bile salts don't really have enzymes, but again, it breaks down these bigger fat globules into smaller ones. And then fat is digested by enzymes coming from the pancreas, the lipases found in the pancreas and from the small intestine itself, into glycerol and fatty acids. The intestinal cell absorbs fatty acids and glycerol and then puts them back together, resynthesizes them into triglycerides, and absorbs them through the lymphatic capillaries. We call them lacteals. Okay, so the majority of that fat will be absorbed through the lymphatic capillaries, a little bit through the blood, but mostly through the lymphatic capillaries into the lymphatic system. And let's just go to the following image to understand what happens through fat absorption. So remember here, we broke down our fat into fatty acids and glycerol. These are your microvilli, and that is the simple columnar cells that line the small intestine. The body, or these cells, are going to absorb these fatty acids and glycerol, and in their smooth ERs, they are going to reconstruct them back, rebuild the triglyceride. And because triglyceride is a fat, it cannot be transported in lymph or in blood because they are not water soluble. So it will surround it with little proteins. Now the protein surrounding the fat is known as a chylomicron. Now these chylomicrons, because they are surrounded with a protein coat, now they are water soluble, and we are able to absorb them through these lacteals to go to the bloodstream. Now, how do we absorb water and electrolytes? Well, electrolytes are absorbed either through diffusion or active transport, again through the blood. Water just follows by osmosis. So looking at how we absorb the different things, everything pretty much is absorbed into the bloodstream, into the blood capillaries, and then off they go to the liver to cook them up into different things. With the exception of fat that is absorbed, the majority of fat is absorbed in the by these lymphatic capillaries known as lacteals, and those would go directly into the bloodstream. So what about the movement of the small intestine? Well, just like any other part of the alimentary tract, there is segmentation, which is the moving the chyme back and forth to kind of mix it with the different digestive enzymes, and that helps expose the digestive enzymes to more and more of the chyme. And there's also a peristaltic movement, which is that wave or pushing movement to push chyme down the small intestine towards the large intestine. We already know that parasympathetic stimulation to any part of the digestive system will increase motility and secretion, while sympathetic would inhibit it. And the sphincter that controls the passage of chyme from the small intestine, in particular the ileum, to the cecum of the large intestine is known as the ileocecal sphincter. We pretty much all of us have had diarrhea before, so it occurs either due to overdistension of the small intestine due to overeating, or maybe due to irritation by a bug. And that will lead to a very strong peristaltic rush, which means that the chyme is going to pass through the small intestine really fast, not giving it enough time to absorb and absorb the water and absorb all of the nutrients, and that will pretty much push it into the large intestine, through the large intestine, out of the body, and that we experience that in the form of diarrhea. And I will see you in the next portion with the large intestine.